I stared out the window at the gray October sky of South Bethany. Heavy raindrops dripped down the glass, blurring the outline of the Golden Years nursing home parking lot. 75 years old, I thought, smoothing the non-existent creases in my faded flannel robe. 75 years old, and here I am in a room with beige walls and the smell of lavender that the administration used to drown out the inevitable aroma of old age and medicine. Mrs. Hodge, you didn't come down for breakfast. The head of Darla, a young nurse with a perpetually disheveled ponytail and a notebook she used to keep track of which of the residents were in compliance, poked through the door. We were worried. At my age, I've earned the right to skip oatmeal if I feel like it, I replied without turning around. I liked Darla, one of the few people who looked older people in the eye, not through them. Tell Paul I'll be at lunch. Darla nodded and disappeared, leaving behind the smell of berry gum and cheap perfume. I sighed and shifted my gaze to the pictures arranged on the dresser. Rex, my husband, was smiling from the largest picture. The picture had been taken the year before he died, when we'd celebrated 40 years of marriage in Lake Tahoe. His eyes, bright blue and alive, seemed to follow me around the room. You would have hated this place, I said quietly. You always said you'd die in your house. You were lucky. Memories of Rex's last days covered me like a heavy blanket. Pancreatic cancer took him quickly, too quickly for me to prepare. Just 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. 4 months that turned my life from an orderly routine to a chaos of grief. After his death, our 3-story Victorian home, where we had lived almost our entire lives together, became unbearably empty. Every room held memories of quarrels and reconciliations, of Orson's upbringing, of quiet evenings reading books and loud celebrations surrounded by friends. I held on to this crypt of memories for almost 3 years before I decided to sell it. The real estate agent, a woman with sharp facial features and a subtle whiff of lemon, said I would get a good price for it. Young families like houses with history, she explained as she snapped photos for the listing. And this house definitely has one. The irony was that its history, no longer fit within these walls. When the deal closed, I felt not only relief, but a strange sense of betrayal, as if I had sold not only the house but the memory of my life with Rex. Orson, my only son, offered to move in with them, to the 2-story mansion in the suburbs where he lived with his wife Gabrielle. I declined. All too well I could see the look on Gabrielle's face change at the thought of her mother-in-law moving in with them, the barely perceptible tension at the corners of her lips when Orson voiced the offer. A microscopic pause before she strained a smile and said, "Of course, Bree, we'd be delighted." Instead, I chose Golden Years. A middle-class nursing home in South Bethany, far enough away from Orson not to be a burden, but close enough for occasional visits, which were becoming increasingly rare. For the first year, Orson visited me every weekend. He came with a box of my favorite chocolates with almonds and coconut, talking about work, the weather, the new car he and Gabrielle had bought in the spring. She came with him about once a month, always impeccably dressed, always with a note of impatience in her voice. Always apologizing that they couldn't stay longer. We have dinner with Orson's co-workers. I promised to stop by my parents. I need to prepare for a presentation for tomorrow. The reasons changed, the subtext remained the same. I was an obligation that needed to be fulfilled, not a person I wanted to spend time with. By the second year, the visits dwindled to 1 or 2 a month. By the third year, Orson was showing up once a month, sometimes less frequently. Phone calls replaced face-to-face meetings, first long ones, with detailed stories about his life and questions about mine. Then shorter ones. Sorry, Mom, I'm in a meeting, I'll call you back later. The later never came. By the 4th year, I had become an item on his to-do list. Call my mom, check mark. Mother's Day, flowers and a card, check mark. Birthday, phone call and gift sent by courier, check mark. I became invisible in my own son's life. I began to notice how this sense of invisibility extended to other aspects of my life. Salespeople in stores looked right through me, turning to younger customers. Waiters in restaurants asked questions of my younger companions instead of me. Doctors spoke to me condescendingly, as if my age automatically diminished my mental capacity. I even did an experiment once. I walked into a downtown bookstore and stood at the information desk for 10 minutes. 3 employees passed by helping other customers before anyone noticed me. And even then, a young man with a scruffy beard asked, "Can I help you find something, Grandma?" Grandma. Not ma'am, not Mrs., but Grandma. An impersonal term that erased everything I used to be. A math teacher with 30 years of experience. The woman who marched for civil rights in the 60s. The one who once won a regional chess tournament. A wife, a mother, a person, all reduced to one word, grandmother. In the golden years, at least I had a name. Bree Hodge, room 213, loves peppermint tea and New York Times crossword puzzles, can't stand oatmeal and group yoga classes. But even here, I often felt invisible, one of the many older women with gray hair and wrinkled hands who are easily mistaken for me in the dining room. A knock on the door snapped me out of my musings. "Mrs. Hodge?" Paul, the receptionist, a middle-aged man with a budding bald spot and perpetually tired eyes, peered into the room. "There's a visitor for you." I was surprised. Today was Wednesday, a normal weekday. Orson never came in on weekdays. "Who?" I asked, absently fixing my hair. "Jennifer Walsh," Paul answered. "She's waiting for you in the visitor's room." Jennifer Walsh. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd heard it. Perhaps a former colleague from high school, or a member of the book club I belonged to before I moved here. I quickly changed into a decent navy blue dress, applied some lipstick, and headed to the visitor's room. There was a woman in her 50s waiting for me, wearing an austere suit and holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Hodge?" She stood up as I entered. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Jennifer Walsh from the law firm of Baker, Hammond and Associates. We're handling the case of your sister, Alice Price." Alice. My older sister, whom we haven't spoken to in almost 20 years. Our last meeting ended in a quarrel over our parents' inheritance, a silly, petty quarrel that eventually turned into an insurmountable chasm. Had something happened to Alice? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Lawyers don't come with good news. "I'm sorry to tell you, but your sister passed away 3 weeks ago," Jennifer said. "Lung cancer, terminal." It all happened very quickly. I felt something squeeze inside me. Alice, my pompous, stubborn, brilliant sister. The one who always knew best, always had one step ahead, always had the last word. Dead. And I didn't even know she was sick. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" My voice sounded sharper than I intended. She told me not to," Jennifer replied simply. "Said she didn't want you to see her like that, but she had changed her will a week before she died." Jennifer opened the folder and pulled out the papers. "Mrs. Price left you the envelope with the letter and her savings, $300,000 in cash. She insisted on cash specifically, so it took us a while to arrange the transfer." She placed the sealed envelope on the table and continued to explain the details of the will, but I was no longer listening. $300,000 in cash from the sister who had pretended for 20 years that I didn't exist. The rest of the day passed like a blur. I signed the necessary paperwork, got the envelope with the letter, and arranged for delivery of the money, an absurd amount of cash that Jennifer offered to deliver to a safe deposit box of my choice. Back in my room, I stared at the envelope for a long time before I dared to open it. Inside was a piece of paper covered in Alice's familiar, sharp handwriting. "Dear Bree, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I think it's a fitting end to our story. I always needed to have the last word, even if I had to die to do it. I know we wasted 20 years in a pointless feud. Now, as I look at the approaching end, it all seems so insignificant. What's a grandmother's set or a father's watch compared to 2 decades of silence? The money I'm leaving you is my redemption. Not that money can fix everything, but hopefully it will give you the freedom I've always lacked. I spent my whole life saving for a future that never came. Don't make the same mistake I did. Your sister Alice." I clutched the letter to my chest and allowed myself to truly cry for the first time in years. Not the quiet tears I'd shed when Rex died, but loud sobs that shook my whole body. When the tears dried up, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if something that had been squeezing my chest for so long had finally let go, and with it came a decision. I'd spent years gradually becoming invisible, first to society, then to my son and his wife. and lately it seemed to myself. But Alice's money made a difference. $300,000, enough to change everything. A plan formed almost instantly. I won't tell Orson about the inheritance over the phone. Instead, I'll arrive at his house, unexpectedly, with the money and an offer. I'll give part of it to him and keep the rest for a rainy day. It will be my chance to be visible in his life again. A chance to rebuild a relationship that had been slowly eroding over the years. The cab stopped in front of a 2-story red brick mansion with white columns. As I looked at my son's house through the car window, I felt like I was visiting a museum, not a family nest. The perfectly trimmed bushes, the immaculate lawn, the ornamental lights along the driveway, all screamed wealth and impeccable taste. Or exorbitant debt, in my experience as a math teacher who'd worked for 30 years in high school. I've seen enough families living beyond their means. "Here we are, ma'am," said the driver, a young guy with an earpiece in his ear. $27.50. I handed him 2 $20 bills. "Keep the change," I said, getting out of the car. "Can you help me with my suitcase?" He nodded and took my old blue suitcase out of the trunk. He set it on the sidewalk, nodded again, and drove off, leaving me alone with my son's house. I took a deep breath before heading for the front door. The money I'd gotten from Alice was safely tucked away in my suitcase. $300,000 in stacks of $100, wrapped in plain wrapping paper and placed in a secret compartment that Rex had made years ago when we were going to Europe. "Just in case we get robbed," he said then. "A backup plan never hurts." A backup plan. I had one too. If all went well, I'd give Orson $150,000, half of it. If not, well, there was a reason I'd left my Golden Years account open and kept my return ticket in the side pocket of my suitcase. The door swung open before I could press the bell. Orson stood on the doorstep, dressed in a blue shirt and dark pants, the epitome of a successful middle manager. "Mom!" He hugged me with an enthusiasm that seemed slightly exaggerated. "You should have called. I would have picked you up at the airport." "And deprive yourself of the pleasure of a surprise?" I smiled, pulling away. "Besides, I know how busy you are at work." "Never that busy for my own mother." He picked up my suitcase. "God, what did you put in here? Bricks?" I laughed, trying to make it sound natural. You know, at my age, it's hard to travel light. Medications, comfortable shoes, books, everything weighs down. Orson led me into a spacious hallway with a marble floor and a crystal chandelier. Luxury bordering on vulgarity. Gabrielle's choice, no doubt. My sister-in-law has always favored ostentatious wealth over refined elegance. "Gabby!" Orson shouted. "Look who's here." Gabrielle appeared from the back of the house, slim, tanned, perfectly styled, and wearing a dress that probably cost as much as my monthly pension. 40 years old and looking 35, the result of strict diets, expensive beauticians, and according to my last phone call with Orson, minor adjustments at the plastic surgeons. "Bree!" She came over, wafting a wave of floral perfume over me, and hugged me, barely touching me. "What a pleasant surprise! Why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have had your room ready." "I'm sorry, darling," I replied with an equally superficial hug. "The decision was spontaneous. I hope I won't cause any inconvenience?" What inconvenience can we talk about?" Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "Your family. Family. A word that should have been warming, but in Gabrielle's mouth sounded like a diagnosis. "I'll show you to your room," Orson said, heading for the stairs. "We'll put you in the guest bedroom on the second floor. It has a nice view of the garden." I followed him, trying not to show how hard it was for me to climb the stairs. The arthritis in my knees had been bothering me more than usual lately. The guest bedroom turned out to be a spacious room with a huge bed, whitewashed walls, and minimalist furniture. Not a single personal item, not a single photograph. The perfect space for someone who wouldn't stay long. "Make yourself comfortable." Orson set the suitcase by the bed. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour." Gabby ordered food from that new Italian restaurant. You know she's not much of a cook. "Thank you, darling." I kissed his cheek. "Give me a little time to freshen up and I'll be downstairs." When the door closed behind him, I finally let myself relax. I sank down on the edge of the bed, feeling the tension of the last few days wash over me. Doubt gnawed at me. Was I right to show up unannounced? Wouldn't it have been better to call first, to to probe. But my gut told me that the element of surprise would give me an advantage. I'd be able to see their real reaction, not the one they'd prepared in days of warning. I went to the window. The view was magnificent, a manicured garden with a gazebo, a small fountain, stone paths. It looked like the cover of a country magazine, and probably cost a fortune. After showering and changing into the blue dress that Rex always called my battle dress, I went downstairs for dinner. The dining room was just like the rest of the house, a huge dark wood table, crystal glasses, silverware. 3 seats were set at one end of the table, as if the rest of the space was reserved for guests who never came. Gabrielle bustled about, arranging the containers of food. "I hope you like Italian food," she said without looking at me. "I ordered a variety of dishes for you to choose from. Everything looks delicious," I replied, though most of the dishes were unfamiliar to me. The golden years favored more traditional American cuisine. "You're so kind, Gabrielle." She finally looked up at me and smiled, this time almost genuinely. "You're welcome. We so rarely see each other." There was a note of relief in her voice that I chose to ignore. Orson showed up with a bottle of wine. "Red or white, Mom?" "Red, please," I replied. "But not too much. At my age, alcohol is no longer a friend." "A few sips of good wine is good for the heart," he said, filling my glass. "At least that's what Dad used to say." "Your father said a lot of things." I smiled at the memory. Not all of them were scientifically sound. We sat down at the table, and the ritual of family dinner began. Passing dishes, comments about the weather, careful questions about my health. Conversation flowed off the beaten path. No one ventured into deep topics. "How are things in the golden years?" Orson asked, putting on his pasta. "You've been talking less about your life there lately." "It's the same," I replied. "You know, not much changes in nursing homes. Same people, same activities, same dinner conversations." "It sounds cozy," Gabrielle said, barely touching her food with her fork. She hardly ate anything at all, only moving pieces around the plate. "That's one way to describe monotony." I took a sip of wine. "But I found something to do. I run a literature club for a few of the residents, play bridge on Tuesdays. I've recently started teaching Paul, our receptionist, how to play chess." "That's wonderful, Mom." Orson looked genuinely pleased. "I always knew you'd find a way to keep yourself busy. Like I had a choice." The words came out harsher than I'd intended. There was an awkward silence at the table. "What I meant," I hastened to correct myself, "is that a man of my age needs to exercise his mind constantly. Otherwise, you start forgetting names and losing your keys." Gabrielle laughed, too loud, too relieved. "Oh, Bree, you were always so practical. Orson says he inherited his organization from you." "Did he?" I looked at my son. I never would have guessed. When I was a kid, I had to remind him to put on clean underwear. "Mom!" Orson blushed like a boy. "I'm sure Gabby doesn't need such details." On the contrary, Gabrielle stepped forward with sudden interest. "I love stories about little Orson. He tells so little about his childhood. I started telling funny stories about my son, how he tried to teach the neighbor's cat to swim in the bathtub, how he once went to school in pajama pants underneath on a particularly cold day, how he stubbornly refused to eat green vegetables until he was 12. Orson was embarrassed, but it was obvious he was pleased with my attention. Gabrielle laughed and asked questions, and for a while the atmosphere at the table warmed, as if the ice had begun to melt. After dinner, Orson insisted that I rest while he and Gabrielle cleared the table. "You're our guest, Mom," he said. "Go into the living room and turn on the TV or read. We'll join you soon." I didn't argue. It had been a tiring evening, and my old knees needed rest. The living room, like the rest of the house, was decorated with a taste that screamed money. Leather sofas, a glass coffee table, a huge TV on the wall. On the mantelpiece were silver-framed photos, Orson and Gabriel on vacation, at some charity event at a ski resort. Not a single picture of me or Rex. I sank down on the couch and picked up a glossy interior design magazine from the coffee table. As I flipped through the pages, I heard muffled voices from the kitchen. At first, I tried not to listen. Eavesdropping had never been a habit of mine. But when Gabrielle's voice grew louder and sharper, I couldn't help but pay attention. "Couldn't you have warned me?" she said. I was scheduled to meet Megan tomorrow. Now I'm going to have to cancel. She's my mother, Gabby. Orson's voice sounded tired, as if this wasn't the first time this conversation had happened. What was I supposed to do, tell her to leave? Of course not. Gabrielle's voice had a honeyed note in it that I'd learned to recognize as a sign of manipulation. But she could have called. We could have prepared. You know how important this meeting is to me. I know, sweetheart. Orson sounded guilty now. But it's only for a few days. She never stays long. A few days during which we have to pretend to be a happy family. Gabrielle lowered her voice, and I strained to hear. Did you see the way she was looking at the house? Grading everything like it was a school test. She's always like that, Orson defended himself. It doesn't mean she's judgmental. But she does, Gabrielle insisted. And I'm sick of feeling inadequate in my own home. Besides, her voice got even quieter, and I only heard a fragment of a sentence. The bank called. I leaned back on the couch, pretending to be completely absorbed in the magazine as they entered the living room. Gabrielle was holding a tray of coffee and dessert, tiramisu in elegant glass vases. I hope you like tiramisu, Brie, she said, with a smile that left no trace of her recent irritation. It's the restaurant's specialty. It looks delicious, I replied, though I had to admit I'd never had it before. Oh well, then you're in for a real treat. She set the tray on the table. Orson, darling, will you pour the coffee? The evening continued in the same vein of ostentatious attention, superficial conversations, carefully avoided topics. I told them about the nursing home, keeping my loneliness to myself. Orson shared news of a promotion at work, failing to mention that the promotion was over a year ago. Gabrielle talked about her charity committee, not specifying that her involvement was limited to buying tickets to events and showing off her outfits. Around 10 o'clock, I cited fatigue and headed to my room. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Gabrielle's cell phone ring and her hurried footsteps toward the study. In the guest bedroom, the first thing I did was check my suitcase. The money was there, untouched. It wasn't that I suspected Orson or Gabrielle of stealing, but the old habit of checking valuables after the move hadn't gone away. I showered, changed into my nightgown, and was about to get into bed when I heard Gabrielle's muffled voice from the next room. She was on the phone, loud enough for the words to seep through the wall. Third time this week. I told them we'd pay next month, but they won't listen. A pause. No, don't tell Orson. He's already on edge. Yeah, they promised a raise, but it's not until next quarter. I know I promised to pay you back by the end of the month. No, borrowing is not an option. We already have 3 outstanding loans. I stepped away from the wall, feeling guilty for eavesdropping, but the information was already in my head. Financial problems. Not just temporary difficulties, but serious debts, judging by the conversation. And Gabrielle was hiding some of it from Orson. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts swirled around the overheard conversation, the luxurious house they probably couldn't afford, and the money in my suitcase. Money that could solve their problems. Money they didn't know about yet. I had planned to tell them about the inheritance tomorrow, over breakfast. Now I wasn't so sure. My intuition, the same intuition that helped me recognize cheating in students' test papers, suggested that I should observe a little longer, to learn more about the situation before revealing my cards. Outside the window, the night rain sounded, and I listened to the sound of it, trying to drown out my troubled thoughts. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and then there were muffled voices. Orson and Gabrielle were clearly arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. I rolled onto my other side, pulling the blanket up to my chin. Tomorrow I would watch more closely, listen sharper, and maybe by the end of the day, I'll realize what's really going on behind the facade of this perfect family bond. The morning began with flavored coffee and an awkward breakfast. Gabrielle was graciousness itself, offering me homemade waffles, fresh berries, and yogurt. She even asked about my plans for the day with such enthusiasm, as if my answer really mattered to her. But I'd already learned to recognize my sister-in-law's mood swings from irritation to luscious concern and back again. I have a client meeting, she announced, elegantly blotting her lips with a napkin. Is it okay if I leave you two alone? Orson's working from home today. Of course, dear, I smiled. My son and I will have a wonderful time. Orson looked up from his tablet. I can reschedule a couple of appointments to show you around the city, Mom. A lot has changed since your last visit. No need, I patted his arm. I know how busy you are. Besides, I could use a day of rest after yesterday's road trip. Gabriel disappeared around 9, leaving behind a trail of perfume and vague promises to return not too late. Orson secluded himself in the home office, and I was left alone with the huge house and my thoughts. I spent the morning wandering through the first floor rooms, studying the family photos, the books on the shelves, the little details that tell us more about people's lives than they do. I discovered that the books are mostly gift editions, many with intact spines. Orson's music collection, which he so carefully collected in his youth, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a sterile, state-of-the-art sound system with playlists of popular music. At noon, Orson came down for a sandwich, looking exhausted after the morning calls. Sorry, Mom, work's been crazy lately, he said as he poured himself some coffee. New project, new deadlines. It's okay, honey. I helped him make lunch. I don't expect you to entertain me every minute. We took a bite in the kitchen, and Orson talked about his promotion, his new responsibilities, and the company's plans. He spoke quickly, a little nervously, avoiding pauses in the conversation. I listened, nodded, asked the right questions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was deliberately steering the conversation away from the financial problems I'd overheard yesterday. Gabby's trying hard, he said suddenly, as if responding to an accusation that wasn't there. Her business is just getting off the ground, but she has big plans. Business? I tried to keep my voice neutral. You didn't tell me Gabrielle started her own business. Interior design, Orson smiled, but the smile seemed strained. She's always had great taste, you know that. And now she's decided to turn it into a profession. That's commendable, I sipped my tea. How long has she been doing this? About a year. He started to collect the dishes, signaling that the topic was closed. Not many clients yet, but you know how it is with a new business. It takes time and, investment. That's it. Investment. Maybe part of their financial problems are related to Gabrielle's business launch. I made a mental note. Of course, dear. I helped him load the dishwasher. By the way, I was planning on going to the bank tomorrow. Do you know where the nearest branch is? A bank? He frowned. Why do you want to go to the bank, Mom? Oh, I just want to check something with my account. I waved my hand. Nothing urgent. Orson relaxed. There are several branches downtown. I can drive you if you want. No need, I smiled. I'm perfectly capable of getting there by cab. I don't want to take you away from your work. He nodded with visible relief and went back to his office, and I continued my exploration of the house. On the second floor, I found Gabrielle's office, a room with a large designer's desk, fabric swatches, and furniture catalogs. Design magazines were scattered everywhere, some with folded pages. On the table was a stack of invoices in open envelopes. I knew I shouldn't look, but curiosity and anxiety overpowered. The bills told their own story. Late credit card payments with an astronomical amount, a late mortgage payment notice, a bill from a landscaper that could cover my nursing home expenses for months. In my desk drawer, I found loan agreements and letters from collection agencies. The situation was worse than I had realized. I carefully put everything back in its place and quietly left the room, feeling like a spy in my own son's house. But the information I'd gotten confirmed my suspicions. They were living well beyond their means, and the situation was critical. Toward evening, Gabrielle returned with bags from the expensive stores. Her cheeks were pink with excitement, and her eyes glistened. A sale, she explained when she caught my eye. It was impossible to resist. At dinner, she was talking about a meeting with a potential client, the owner of a country house who wanted a complete makeover. If I get this order, it'll be a breakthrough. She squeezed Orson's hand. Exactly what we need. That's wonderful, sweetheart, he smiled, but I could see the tension in the corners of his eyes. I watched them, trying to puzzle out the dynamics of their relationship. Gabrielle glared, controlling, demanding attention. Orson conceded, smoothed, supported. They were like actors in a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their role. But behind the perfect facade were cracks that were becoming more and more noticeable. After dinner, I cited fatigue and went up to my room. I wanted to read, but found that I had left my reading glasses downstairs in the living room. Tiptoeing downstairs so as not to disturb Orson and Gabriel, I heard their voices from the study. The door was ajar and the light fell in a narrow strip on the hallway carpet. "We can't stall any longer," Gabriel's voice sounded insistent. "The bank had given us a final warning. One more missed payment and they'll start foreclosure proceedings." "I know," Orson said quietly, tiredly. "I'm trying, Gabby. I talked to my boss about the bonus, but he said it won't be until next quarter." "Next quarter?" Her voice went up an octave. "Are you kidding me? We're 3 weeks away from the mortgage deadline. Not to mention credit cards and your car loan." There was a pause and I heard the sound of a bottle being opened. Then the clinking of glass against glass. They were pouring themselves a drink. "We need to think about other options," Gabrielle said, lowering her voice. More immediate sources of income." "What do you mean?" Orson sounded wary. "Your mother," Gabrielle said so quietly that I had to hold my breath to hear. "She's hiding something, I'm sure. This sudden visit, her questions about the bank." "Mom?" Orson laughed, but it sounded unnatural. "She only has a pension, Gabby. What could she be hiding?" "I don't know," Gabrielle said, "but something's not right here. Have you noticed how she carries her suitcase around with her? Never leaves it, doesn't even unpack it completely. I went into her room while you were at lunch and tried to look in, but it was locked." It took my breath away. "She went through my stuff! Good thing I had the foresight to lock the suitcase." "You went through my mother's things?" Orson sounded shocked. "Gabby, this is out of line! Don't lecture me," she snapped. "We need money, not morals. If your mother has any savings, we need to know about it." "And what do you suggest?" Orson asked after a pause. His voice sounded humble, as if he already knew the answer, and was not ready to resist. "Talk to her," Gabrielle said more gently. "Tell her about our problems. She's your mother, she'll want to help. If she has savings, she might lend us some. And if she doesn't, well, at least we'll know for sure." "I can't just ask her for money," Orson protested. "It would be humiliating." "More humiliating than losing your house?" Gabrielle asked sharply. "Is it more humiliating to declare bankruptcy? It's your choice, Orson. Your pride or our future." There was silence again, and I heard Orson sigh heavily. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll talk to her tomorrow. But don't expect miracles, Gabby. She really might not have anything." "She must have something," Gabrielle insisted. "The house she sold was worth a lot. Even if most of the money went to that nursing home of hers, there had to be something left." I carefully backed away from the door, afraid they'd hear me breathing. I decided to leave my glasses downstairs. They weren't that important. Quietly, trying not to squeak on the steps, I walked back up to my room. My heart was pounding in my chest like crazy. They were in a desperate situation worse than I'd thought. And now Gabriel had convinced Orson to try to get the money out of me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to gather my thoughts. Maybe this wasn't such a bad thing. After all, that's what I'd planned on sharing the inheritance with my son. It might even be for the best that they were in a difficult situation. My gift would be more valuable. But something inside me resisted the thought. I decided to wait, to listen some more. Perhaps in the morning the picture would be clearer. I didn't sleep well that night, waking up at every rustle in the house. Around 3 a.m, I heard voices again from Orson and Gabrielle's room through the thin wall. They weren't arguing, but speaking in muffled voices, but loud enough for me to make out the words. "You need to be more convincing," Gabrielle said. "Tell her about the kids who can't go to college without our help." "We don't have children," Orson replied dryly. "She doesn't know that," Gabrielle brushed it off. "We can say I'm pregnant, and we need money to prepare for the baby." "I'm not going to lie to my own mother about being pregnant," Orson said indignantly. "That's low even for you, Gabby." "Then think of something else." Her voice became sharper. "Say you have health problems, that you need surgery, anything. We need that money, Orson, all of it." "All she has, maybe just a few thousand," Orson said. "That's not going to solve our problems." "It's a start," Gabrielle insisted. "And once we know how much she has, we can plan further. Like moving her into a state-run nursing home." "What?" Orson sounded shocked. "Don't look at me like that," Gabrielle said. "It's just common sense. Why would she need an expensive private home when the state can provide basic care? If we took her out of there, we could save a few thousand a month. I froze, not believing my ears. A state-run nursing home? I'd visited one once when I was visiting an old friend. Overcrowded rooms, indifferent staff, the smell of urine and disinfectant, patients tied to beds. I shuddered at the thought. It's her money, Gabby, Orson said after a long pause. She earned it. It's for her comfort in her old age. Her comfort? Gabriel let out a short laugh. Orson, she's 75. How long does she have left? 5 years? 10 if she's lucky? We've got a long way to go. That money will do a lot more good for us than it will for her. There was silence, and I thought Orson would finally be outraged, stand up for me. But when he spoke, his voice was quiet and humble. All right, he said. I'll talk to her tomorrow. I'll find out how much she has and try to convince her to help us. Great, Gabriel sounded satisfied. And don't forget to mention that we're always willing to take her in if maintaining a nursing home becomes too burdensome. That'll set the stage for a follow-up conversation. And if she refuses? Orson asked. What then? Then we'll think of other options. Gabriel's voice became hard. Perhaps she should reconsider her will. After all, you are her only son. Who else would she leave the money to? You talk about my mother like she's a money bag, Orson's voice trembled. It's not right. What's wrong is that we're on the brink of financial disaster, and your mother is sitting on money that could save us. Gabriel cut Gabriel off. It's time to stop being a mama's boy and start thinking about our future. I crawled away from the wall, feeling nauseous. My son, my Orson, the same boy I'd raised alone after his father's early death, who I'd read bedtime stories to, whose broken knees I'd kissed, who I'd taught to be honest and caring, was now planning to bilk me out of money and then send him to live out the rest of his days in a state institution with minimal care. And Gabrielle, her words about how much I had left, her calculating nature, her willingness to manipulate and lie, it was scarier than I could have imagined. This woman didn't see me as a person, but as a hindrance, an obstacle to overcome on the way to my money. It took me a few minutes to get over the trembling in my hands. My first impulse was to knock on their door, to scream, to accuse. But what good would that do? Orson would apologize. Gabrielle would feign shock. They'd assure me I'd misunderstood. And then they'd be even more careful what they said, and I'd lose my edge. No, I have to do things differently. I have to protect myself and my money, Alice's inheritance, which was meant for my freedom, not to pay Gabrielle's debts and her insane spending sprees. I have to get out of here before they realize their plan. I quietly got out of bed and walked over to my suitcase. I opened it and checked the secret compartment. The money was there, $300,000 packed in neat bundles. I closed the suitcase and thought, should I leave right now in the middle of the night, or wait until morning, when I could discreetly call a cab? The decision came quickly. In the morning, they could start their plan, and I'd be trapped in endless conversations, manipulations, maybe even direct demands. No, better to leave now, under the cover of night. I quietly gathered my things, packing everything into my suitcase. I dressed in comfortable clothes for traveling, took my purse with my documents and phone. I thought for a moment about leaving a note, but decided that it would only give them an advantage. They'd know I'd heard everything, and could prepare for an explanation. Carefully, trying not to creak the floorboards, I left the room. The house was silent, only the clock in the hall counting down the seconds. I walked slowly down the stairs, each step difficult, not only because of the arthritis in my knees, but also because of the weight on my heart. This house, these people, my son and his wife, they were my family. Or they should have been. I realize now that it was only an illusion, a house of cards that crumbled at the first whiff of truth. Once in the lobby, I pulled out my phone and called a cab through the app. Arriving in 15 minutes, the screen announced. I carefully turned off the alarm system. Orson had used the same code as our old house, his birth date, and quietly stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. The night air was fresh and cool. I stood in the shade of a tree, gripping the handle of my suitcase tightly, and looked up at the dark second-story windows. There, beyond those windows, my son and his wife were plotting how to rob me of my last years of a decent life. The pain of that realization was almost physical. The headlights of an approaching cab showed in the distance. It was time to leave, to flee the betrayal I never expected to experience from my own flesh and blood. With a heavy heart but firm resolve, I stepped toward the road, ready to begin a new chapter of my life. A chapter in which I would have to defend myself against those who were supposed to be my protectors. The cab glided silently through the deserted streets of the sleeping city. I stared out the window at the dark windowed houses floating by, and I felt like I was watching a life that now existed in a parallel reality, inaccessible, alien. The driver, a young man with a smooth-shaven head and an earpiece in his ear, made no attempt to make conversation, for which I was grateful. I needed time to process what had happened. "To the bus station, right?" he said as we drove out of Orson's neighborhood. "Yes, please." My voice was quiet but firm. I gripped the handle of the suitcase tighter, as if someone might snatch it from me right out of the moving car. $300,000, money that could have changed my life for the better, that I was going to share with my son. Now it had become the reason for my flight, transformed from a gift to prey, hunted by the people closest to me. Memory obligingly tossed me scraps of an overheard conversation. "How long does she have left? 5 years? 10, if she's lucky? This will set the stage for a later conversation. This money will do far more good for us than for her." Gabrielle's words stung like wasps, leaving painful marks in the mind. But what hurt the most was Orson's acquiescence. My son, my boy, who had once looked at me with eyes full of adoration and trust. How had we gotten to this point? At what point did I stop being a mother and turn into a source of potential income? The cab turned onto the wide street leading to the bus station. The night city seemed ghostly, unreal, like a set in a shadow theater. Sparse streetlights cast circles of yellowish light on the empty sidewalks. The signs of convenience stores flickered with a neon glow. "Rough night?" the driver asked suddenly, catching my gaze in the rearview mirror. "You could say that." I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't do it. "You know," he slowed down at the intersection, my grandmother always said, "the night is darkest before the dawn. It's old-fashioned, but there's something to it." "Your grandmother was a wise woman," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "I hope she's right." He nodded and focused back on the road, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Those thoughts were bitter. I thought back to raising Orson alone after Rex's early death. The boy was only 15 when his father passed away. A difficult age, especially for a boy who had lost the main man in his life. I worked 2 jobs to give him a decent living so he could get into a good college. Denied myself everything from new clothes to vacations we hadn't been able to afford in years. I remember when he got pneumonia his senior year of high school. I didn't leave his bedside for 3 days, applying cold compresses to his flaming forehead, counting every breath, praying to all the gods I didn't believe in. When the crisis passed and the doctor said the worst was over, I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed with relief, choking back tears of gratitude. And now this boy-turned-man was ready to send me to a state nursing home to save a few thousand a month. The bitterness of this betrayal was so sharp that it took my breath away. "Here we are," the driver's voice snapped me out of my memories. The bus station was almost empty at this late hour. A few lone figures dozed on the plastic seats in the waiting room, the janitor slowly pushing a mop in front of him, clearing the concrete floor of the day's traces. I paid the driver, leaving a generous tip, and headed for the ticket office. The night cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and dyed red hair, was lazily flipping through a magazine. "What can I do for you?" she asked, stifling a yawn. "I need a ticket to South Bethany on the next flight," I said, pulling out my wallet. She clicked on the computer keyboard. "There's a bus at 4:30 in the morning, arriving in South Bethany around 8. Would that work?" "Yeah, that's fine." I handed her my credit card. "1 ticket, please." After I got the ticket, I found a seat in the waiting room away from the other passengers. It was over an hour before departure. I put my suitcase between my legs, gripping the handle tightly, and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Orson, so he'd already detected my absence. I turned the phone off. The explanation could wait. Sitting in the half-empty waiting room, I suddenly felt very old and very alone. All my life I thought I was building a solid foundation for the future. Mine and my son's. I worked, saved, planned. And here's the result. At 75, I'm sitting in a bus station in the middle of the night, having run away from my own child's house with a suitcase full of money. Funny if you think about it. Or tragic. The line between comedy and tragedy was always thin. Fatigue came in waves, but I was afraid to close my eyes. What if I fell asleep and someone stole my suitcase? What if Orson guessed where I was going and showed up here before the bus left? Paranoia, my mind whispered. But my instinct for self-preservation was stronger. At 4 o'clock, they announced boarding for my flight. I struggled to get up, feeling my knees aching after sitting on the hard plastic seat for so long. The bus was almost empty, a few students with headphones plugged into their gadgets, an elderly couple in the middle of the cabin, a lone man in a worn jacket snoring by the window. I chose a seat at the back of the bus, put my suitcase on the seat next to me, and covered it with my jacket. When the bus started, I felt strangely relieved, as if with each kilometer away from Orson's house, some invisible weight fell from my shoulders. As I stared out the window at the dark silhouettes of the buildings, I thought about how my relationship with my son had changed over the years. When he'd met Gabrielle, I'd been happy for him. An energetic, ambitious girl, she seemed like a good match for my soft, sometimes too compliant Orson. I hoped she'd inspire him to do more, help him realize the potential I'd always seen in him. But gradually, I began to notice a change. Orson began to call less often. His visits became shorter and more formal. When I asked about his life, he answered in generalities, avoiding details. One day when I called unannounced, Gabrielle answered the phone and said Orson couldn't come over because they were very busy. I could hear his voice in the background and a laugh that broke off when Gabrielle said something sharply to him, covering the receiver with her hand. Gradually, I began to feel like an outsider in my own son's life. I was invited to Thanksgiving and Christmas, mandatory family holidays that couldn't be ignored without social stigma. But even then, I felt like a guest, not a member of the family. When I decided to sell the house and move to the golden years, Orson didn't object. He offered to move in with them, but there was no enthusiasm in his voice, and Gabrielle didn't hide her relief when I declined. "You'll be happier among your peers," she'd said then. Now I understood what that meant. You'll be away from us and our money. The bus stopped at a small station for a short break. I didn't get out for fear of leaving my suitcase unattended. Instead, I pulled a bottle of water out of my bag and took a few sips. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Orson again. I ignored the call. What would I tell him when we finally talked? That I overheard him talking to his wife? That I know about their plans to send me to a state-run nursing home? That I felt betrayed by my own son? Words seemed inadequate, unable to convey the depth of my pain and frustration. As the bus set off again, the sky in the east began to lighten. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as if the sun was hesitant to rise at all on this day. I watched the darkness recede, giving way to a pale, blurry light, and thought about what would happen next. Waiting for me in South Bethany was the Golden Years nursing home, a place that had never felt like a real home to me, but now seemed like the only safe haven. Except I couldn't go back there right away. Orson would probably look for me there first. I needed a temporary refuge, a place to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. And then I thought of Lynette. My old friend, whom I'd met in college, lived in a small house on the outskirts of South Bethany. Widowed 5 years ago, she led a quiet, measured life, occasionally visiting me at Golden Years with homemade baked goods and fresh gossip. Lynette always said her home was open to me. "If you ever get tired of that gilded cage, come visit me," she joked, referring to the Golden Years. "I have a spare bedroom and no medication schedule." I pulled out my phone and turned it on, ignoring the new missed call notifications from Orson. I found Lynette's number and dialed the message. "I'll be in South Bethany by 8 in the morning. Need your help? I'll explain when I meet you. Can you meet me at the bus station?" The answer came almost immediately, despite the early hour. "I will. Everything okay?" "Not really," I wrote. "I'll tell you when I meet you." "Waiting. Don't worry," Lynette replied, and I felt a surge of gratitude toward this woman who, unlike my own blood, had never turned her back on me. I dozed the rest of the way, waking up with every twist and turn and breaking of the bus. I dreamed of Orson, a little boy with broken knees and trusting eyes, asking why I was leaving. "I'm not leaving," I told him in my dream. "You're the one who left me." He stared in incomprehension, and his face gradually changed, matured, his features sharpened, his eyes darkened, until in front of me was a stranger in the guise of my son. I woke up with my heart pounding as the bus pulled into South Bethany. The morning light flooded the familiar streets, giving them an almost postcard-like appearance, a small town waking up for a new day. Ordinary people were rushing to work, stores were opening, and the world continued to turn, even though my personal universe had undergone a cataclysm. The South Bethany bus station was a modest red brick building with a small cafe and newsstand inside. I saw Lynette as soon as I got off the bus. She was standing at the entrance, tall, straight, with a mop of gray hair gathered in a careless bun. She was wearing a simple linen dress and cardigan, despite the morning chill. "Bree." She waved at me and quickly came over to help me with my suitcase. "Oh my God, you look exhausted. What happened?" "Long story." I hugged her, smelling the familiar scent of lavender soap and homemade baked goods. "Thank you for coming." "Don't be silly." She took my hand in hers. "My car's in the parking lot. Let's go to my place. I'll make breakfast and you can tell me all about it." As we walked to her old Volvo, I could feel the tension of the last few hours slowly ebbing away. Lynette didn't ask questions. She was just there, reliable, calm, familiar. "Your son called me about an hour ago," she said abruptly as we reached the car. "Asked if I knew where you were." Sounded concerned. I froze. "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen you since Tuesday when I visited you at Golden Years." She looked at me carefully. "I didn't lie, but from the look of you and your sudden appearance so early with your suitcase, you had something serious going on." I nodded, feeling the lump in my throat again. "Very serious, Lynette. Yeah, I don't know if I can ever forgive him." She helped me into the car and carefully put my suitcase in the trunk. "Whatever happens," she said as she started the engine, "you can stay with me as long as you need to. The spare bedroom is always yours." "Thank you." I looked out the window at the streets of South Bethany, and it felt like I was home from a long, grueling trip. I need time to think things over, decide what to do next. "You'll have all the time in the world." Lynette drove the car confidently through the morning streets. "In the meantime, a hot breakfast, a shower, and rest. The rest will have to wait." I leaned back in my seat, feeling the fatigue of the last 24 hours weighing down on me like a heavy blanket. There was a lot to decide: what to do with the money, how to protect myself from Orson and Gabrielle's attempts to get to it, how to live with the realization of betrayal by the people closest to me. But now, in this moment, I felt a strange relief. I was no longer a prisoner of illusions of a happy family. I saw the truth. Bitter, painful, but the truth. And in that clarity was a kind of liberation. Lynette's house appeared on the horizon. A small, cozy cottage with a garden full of spring flowers. A place where peace and safety awaited me. A temporary refuge on the way to a new life, a life I was to build anew at 75. "Here we are." Lynette pulled the car into the neat driveway. "Welcome to my humble home." I looked at her, the crinkles in the corners of her eyes, the kind smile, the hands with veins protruding like my own, and felt a surge of gratitude. "You know," I said, "sometimes family isn't about the blood that binds us together, but about the people who will never leave us in a time of need." Lynette squeezed my hand. "Welcome home, Bree. Everything's gonna be okay now." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it would be. Lynette's house became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. The modest but cozy cottage with a garden full of spring flowers was exactly what I needed. A quiet haven away from the storm I'd left behind. Lynette, with her usual tactfulness, didn't press with questioning, giving me time to come to my senses. It wasn't until the third day, over a cup of afternoon tea, that I finally told her the whole story. The inheritance from Alice, the plans to share the money with Orson, the overheard conversation, and the night's escape. "Selfish bastards," Lynette said when I was done. Her normally calm face contorted with anger. Especially that Gabrielle. I always knew there was something wrong with her. Orson's no better. Bitterness overwhelmed me. He went along with her plan, my own son. Bree. Lynette covered my hand with hers. Some people can manipulate others so skillfully that they lose their own will. I'm not making excuses for Orson, but maybe the years of living with that woman have just broken. I wanted to object, to say that a grown man should be responsible for his own decisions, but the phone call interrupted our conversation. Lynette looked at the screen and frowned. It's him again, she said. Third time today. Orson had called Lynette every day since I disappeared. Sometimes he called me too, but I didn't answer, only read the messages he left. Mom, where are you? We're worried. Please call. We can talk things over. If I did something wrong, let's talk about it. None of the messages included an admission of guilt or an understanding of what had happened. The next day, 2 more of my friends joined us. Susan Meyer, a Golden Years neighbor, an eccentric former artist with an unfading optimism, and Edie Britt, a sarcastic and insightful former high school colleague. Lynette organized the meeting as a women's council. 4 older women united by friendship and a common goal to help me plan for the future. You should sue him, Edie said when I told them my story, for moral damages and attempted financial abuse. Edie, Susan rolled her eyes. You see everything as a reason to sue. Bree doesn't need revenge, she needs a plan. And safety, Lynette added. Orson's coming to South Bethany tomorrow. He'll be looking everywhere for Bree. Then we need to move fast, Susan stepped forward. I have a friend at Seaside Gardens, a new nursing home on the coast, much nicer than Golden Years, private with top-class medical care. I could give her a call. Seaside Gardens? I remembered the gorgeous ocean view building that Lynette and I sometimes drove past. But it must cost a fortune. You have a fortune, Edie said, nodding at the suitcase. It was time to put it to good use for yourself, not for those ungrateful crooks. We spent the afternoon discussing options and making a plan. By evening, the decision was made. I would move into Seaside Gardens, paying a year's rent in advance to protect myself from Orson's financial manipulations. I would put some of the money in a bank account in my own name and some in cash for emergencies. The next morning, Susan called her friend at Seaside Gardens, and I had an appointment with the receptionist by noon. Lynette and I went there right after lunch. The Seaside Gardens was exactly as I had envisioned, an elegant 3-story building with panoramic windows surrounded by a manicured park overlooking the ocean. Inside, we were greeted by Victoria Bowen, a receptionist with impeccable hair and attentive eyes. We spent the next hour touring Seaside Gardens. Spacious single suites with private bathrooms, a restaurant with a chef's menu, a library, a winter garden, a swimming pool, a medical center with full-time staff. All of this was impressive and promised comforts I never dreamed of in my golden years. We're trying to create not just a place to live, but a real home, Victoria explained as we sat in her office discussing the details. Our residents retain their independence, but receive all the support they need. The price was in line with the level, twice as much as the Golden Years. But with Alice's inheritance, I could afford it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making a decision for myself, not someone else. When we returned home, we found Susan and Edie waiting for us with the news. Orson's here, Susan said as soon as we walked in. He was at the Golden Years asking about you. Then he went to the police. The police? I went cold. Why? He wanted to file a missing persons report, Edie explained. But it was explained to him that an adult of legal capacity has the right to leave without notifying his family, especially if he left a note. What note? I looked at her perplexed. Edie smiled smugly. The one I dropped off in your room at Golden Years this morning. Dear Orson, I've decided to take a little vacation. Don't worry about me, I'm perfectly fine. I'll contact you when I'm ready. It's in your handwriting. Well, it's pretty similar. Go! I didn't know whether to be horrified or delighted. It's a fake ID. It's a friend's defense, she shrugged. Besides, you're really fine and you'll actually contact him when you're ready. I just expedited the process. Over the next week, we put the plan into action. I did all the paperwork for the move to Seaside Gardens, opened a new bank account, and deposited half of Alice's inheritance into it and divided the rest between a safe deposit box and a small stash in the new apartment. The day I moved into Seaside Gardens, I finally decided to take Orson's call. Orson. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. Mom! He breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, thank God! Where are you? I was going crazy with worry. I'm safe, I said. And I know, Orson. I heard everything. There was a pause so long that I wondered if I'd lost the connection. What are you talking about? He finally asked, but he didn't sound so sure. About your conversation with Gabrielle, about your plans to take my money and send me to a state-run nursing home, about how long I had left, 5 years or 10 if I was lucky. There was silence again, then a quiet, squeezed voice. Mom, I can explain. There's no need, I interrupted him. I realized everything that night, that's why I left. It's not what you think, he said quickly, as if he was afraid I'd hang up. Gabby, she was upset saying stupid things. We would never do anything like that. But you agreed, Orson. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I heard you say okay, how you promised to convince me to give you the money. I was just trying to calm her down. There was desperation in his voice. We're in a difficult financial situation, but I would never hurt you, Mom. Never. It's too late, Orson, I sighed. The harm has already been done. I can't trust you anymore. We arranged to meet in 2 days at a cafe on the waterfront, a public place where he couldn't pressure me. I asked Lynette and Edie to accompany me, and they agreed without hesitation. Orson showed up exactly at the appointed time, alone, without Gabrielle as I'd requested. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and unkempt stubble. Not at all like the well-groomed middle manager he'd been just a couple weeks before. Mom! He rushed over to me and tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I'm so happy to see you. Sit down, Orson. I pointed to the chair across from me. I'd like you to meet my friends Lynette and Edie. He nodded at them, clearly embarrassed by their presence. I was hoping we could talk privately. It's not up for discussion. I cut him off. It's either that or nothing. Mom, I have to explain about that conversation. Gabby was upset we'd gotten a notice from the bank about a possible mortgage foreclosure. She was saying things she didn't mean. What about you? I stared at him. Did you say things you didn't mean too? He lowered his eyes. I was weak, scared. Agreed to appease her, but I would never have realized the plan. Never. How convenient, Edie observed. You can always say you weren't going to do what you said you were going to do. Mom, I love you. You're the only mother I have. How could you think I'd be capable of hurting you? Because I heard it with my own ears, Orson, I said calmly. You went along with Gabrielle's plan. You didn't protect me. I was wrong. He reached across the table trying to take my palm, but I pulled away. I was weak, confused. We're really in a difficult financial situation. Gabby spent too much on her business, which never started generating income. We have 3 delinquent loans and the bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. And that's why you decided to use me. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. No, I mean, he stammered. Gabby suggested I ask you for help, that's all. I know it sounds awful, but she didn't mean… I did, he said firmly. She did, I said firmly. Every word, and you agreed with her. I've moved, Orson, I said, to a new nursing home. Better than the golden years. I'm safe and supervised there. That's good, he nodded, still not looking at me. I'm happy for you, Mom. And I'm not giving you money, I continued. Not now, not later. Alice's inheritance is my chance for independence and a decent old age. I won't let it be taken from me. He flinched as if struck by a blow. An inheritance? From Aunt Alice? His eyes widened. So that's where the… How much? None of your business, Lynette interjected. That money belongs to your mother. I was just asking. He held up his hands in a protective gesture. I didn't even know Aunt Alice was dead. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? Because you've taken almost no interest in my life over the past few years, Orson. I felt the bitterness rising from inside. Calls once a month. Formal visits on holidays. I became an item on your to-do list, not a person. What now? He finally asked. You're just going to cut me out of your life? I sighed. Despite all the pain and disappointment, I couldn't give up on my son completely. He was my blood, a part of me. No, Orson. But things would be different. No unannounced visits, no talk of money. If you want to be a part of my life, you're gonna have to prove that I can trust you. And Gabby? He looked worried. I don't want to see Gabriel. My voice was firm. Never. He nodded, accepting the terms. When it was time to say goodbye, he tried to hug me, and this time I let him, a brief, formal embrace, without the warmth that had previously been between us. The following months were a period of adjustment and discovery. Seaside Gardens turned out to be exactly what I needed. A quiet, comfortable place with respectful staff and interesting neighbors. My ocean view apartment became a true haven. A spacious living room with large windows, a bedroom with a comfortable bed, a small kitchen where I could cook when I didn't want to go down to the communal restaurant. Orson called every week, as promised. Our conversations were polite but superficial. Edie turned out to be right. A month after we met, Orson called asking for financial help. The bank has set an eviction date, Mom. His voice shook. We're going to lose the house. I'm not asking for much, just a small loan to buy time. No, Orson, I was adamant. We talked about this. No money talk. But Mom, no, I interrupted him. Sell the house yourself before it becomes an eviction. Find a smaller place to live. Start living within your means. He didn't call for 2 weeks after that conversation. When he finally did, he told her that he and Gabrielle had decided to sell the house and move into an apartment. She was furious and blamed it on me, but they had no choice. Meanwhile, at Seaside Gardens, I found a new family. I met Carlos, a former literature professor who ran a weekly book club, Mary, an admiral's widow whose stories of traveling the world made you forget about time, and Tom, a former chef who sometimes gave cooking classes for the residents. Lynette, Susan, and Edie visited often. We had tea parties on my terrace overlooking the ocean, played cards, and discussed books and movies. Those were the happiest hours of my days. Time spent with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. One evening, as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset, Susan suddenly suggested, what if we went on a trip, all of us together? A trip? I looked at her in surprise. Where to? To Europe. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I've always dreamed of seeing Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We could rent apartments through these new rental services, travel at our own pace. At our age? Edie asked skeptically, but there was already interest in her voice. Why not? Lynette seconded the idea. We're not getting any younger, girls. If not now, when? I wondered. I had money. The money Alice had left me so I could live life to the fullest, not just exist. Why not use some of it to fulfill a long-held dream? You know, I said, Rex and I had always planned to go to Italy after he retired. Visit Florence, Venice, Tuscany. But then he got sick and, the plans stayed plans. So maybe it's time to put them into action, Lynette asked, looking at me with understanding. We spent the rest of the evening planning the trip, making lists of cities we wanted to visit, discussing itineraries, laughing at the idea of 4 older American women conquering Europe. For the first time in a long time, I felt real excitement, anticipation for the adventure. When my friends left, I sat on the terrace with a cup of tea, looking out at the night ocean. My phone vibrated. Orson was calling. I almost decided not to answer it, but something made me pick it up. Mom? His voice sounded strangely tense. I was hoping you'd answer. What's wrong, Orson? I felt a little anxious. He stammered. I need your help, Mom. Gabby and I broke up. She went to her yoga instructor. Took most of our savings. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, feeling conflicting emotions struggling inside, sympathy for my son and wariness born of bitter experience. I'm sorry, Orson, I said finally, but if you're calling for money... No, he interrupted me. I mean, yes, I need money, but not yours. I was wondering if you could look for an apartment in South Bethany, something inexpensive. I'm thinking of moving there, start over, closer to you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe that this was a sincere desire to rebuild our relationship. The other part suspected it was just another manipulation. I understand if you don't want to help, he added quietly. After everything that's happened. But I really want to change, Mom, to be a better person, and I need your support. Not financial support, just knowing you're there for me. I stared out at the dark ocean, thinking about the journey ahead, about my new friends, about the freedom I had found. That true family isn't always those who are related to you by blood, but those who choose to be there for you, who see you as a person, not a means to an end. I'll think about it, Orson, I said finally. Call me in a week. Right now, I'm busy preparing for my trip. A trip? He sounded surprised. Where are you going? Europe. I felt a slight smile on my lips. With my friends. We want to see the world while we still can. That's wonderful, Mom. He sounded genuinely happy. You deserve it. When we finished talking, I remained seated on the terrace, listening to the sound of the waves and pondering the strange twists and turns of fate. At 75, my life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. I lost illusions about family, but found true friends. I survived betrayal, but found freedom. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive Orson, trust him again. I didn't know if his desire to change was genuine or just another attempt at manipulation. But I did know one thing. I was no longer invisible, a voiceless old woman to be ignored and used. I was Bree Hodge, a woman with a will of her own, a right to happiness, and a life worth living. And no one could take that away from me.